Warm greetings to our virtual audience around the world. Good evening, good night, or good morning, wherever you happen to be. My name is Stephen Mull, and I work as the University of Virginia's Vice Provost for Global Affairs. And it is a great honor to welcome you to this first ever virtual exhibit of our prized East Asian and Tibetan collection here in the University of Virginia's library system. As Vice Provost for Global Affairs, my principal responsibility here at UVA is to create opportunities for our community to have global experiences. And while most people usually think of global experiences as study or research abroad, the truth is that one of the most meaningful global experiences any member of our UVA community can have is spending some time in our library's East Asian and Tibetan collections. When Thomas Jefferson founded UVA over 200 years ago, most of the university's academic and cultural interests ran to Europe. But as time went on, successive generations of students and scholars discovered the enormous cultural wealth and scientific achievements that had predated that in Europe by many centuries, and we rushed to fill the gap. 200 years later, we have started making amends for our earlier oversight. The university opened its first, and so far only, overseas office in Shanghai about 10 years ago under the leadership of our office director, Justin Ojak. And we are proud that every year we have well over 3,000 Asian students studying here with us at UVA. Our library system has about 120,000 volumes written in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, some of which are quite old, including various texts, art books, and historic documents. And we supplement that collection with videos and music recordings from throughout East Asia. Our faculty and students also have access to an enormous online archive of full-text databases of extensive publications in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean from throughout East Asia. Our Tibetan collection, which the university established in the 1960s and which has grown to be one of the largest in the world, today features about 15 original pecha, the loose leaf bound books from Tibet that are exclusive to Tibet, and some of which in our possession are between 200 and 300 years old. And we also have thousands of copies available for research. We also have in our Tibetan collection 25,000 titles of more modern works on such topics as Buddhism, Sanskrit, and Tibetan language, literature, art, history, and medicine. We look forward to opening a special room dedicated to this extraordinary collection in our main Alderman Library when it reopens after its extensive renovations in the coming year. Tonight's program is a great opportunity to give warm thanks to many of you in the audience whose generosity has been so important to maintaining and growing these collections as an invaluable resource for our students and scholars for many generations to come. And to others of you who have supported UVA's broader global mission over the years. We could not succeed as we have without your support. And we are so very grateful to you for your remarkable generosity over the years. We hope to see you here on grounds as soon as possible when the library reopens so that we can thank as many of you in person as possible. Tonight, we're very excited to have a distinguished panel of experts to lead us through this virtual tour, and it is my great pleasure to introduce them. Brenda Gunn, our moderator, is the university's Associate Librarian for Special Collections and Preservation and Director of the Mary and David Harrison Institute for American History, Literature, and Culture. Brenda has been with the university since 2017. Veronica Fu, who also joined the UVA Library team in 2017, is the Chief Librarian of the East Asian Collection, in which capacity she maintains and plans the collection and ensures quality access to it for all. Wei Wang is the librarian for the university's Center for East Asian Studies, in which capacity she assists countless students and scholars in their research into Asian cultural and history. And finally, last but not least, Nawang Thokmey is the university's librarian for Tibet, Buddhist, and Contemplative Studies. Nawang joined us at UVA in 1996, so he's been here a long time, providing outstanding support with UVA's Tibetan Studies faculty, students, and staff, as well as national and international researchers. Brenda, I'm so pleased to turn the program over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here, everyone. I'm going to start by giving you a little introduction to the Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library. Let's see, we'll get there we go. All right. The focus of my presentation tonight will be on the Guan Hailu collection, which is a relatively recent acquisition for special collections. But before I really get into the details about that, I did want to just say a few words about Special Collections Library. Next slide, please. Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections is the special collections and archival repository within the university library. We steward and make discoverable and accessible rare books, archives, manuscripts, photographs, and other audio-visual materials such as film and video, and material culture collections, including archaeology collections significant to the early colonization of what would eventually become the United States. Our collections can't be checked out or taken from the building, so all of our researchers use the special collections in the reading room, which is what you see here. Next slide, please. For building our collections, we rely on donations of rare materials from individuals, groups, and organizations, and also on monetary gifts and endowed funds to purchase additions to our collections. UVA has one of the world's great collections of American literature, outstanding for its breadth and depth in books, and to a lesser extent, manuscripts and archival material. For British literature, we're stronger in 18th and 19th century, and we specialize in the Gothic novel, translation, and chapbooks. We have a wonderful collection of the built environment, architecture, and landscape architecture, really focusing on the university and on Virginia architecture. Our material culture collections are growing, and we're very proud of that. I mentioned that we have archaeological collections, including artifacts associated with the University of Virginia, including recently excavated and some legacy collections, as well as all of the related archival material to those. We have the University Fine and Decorative Arts Collection, which highlights representative examples of 18th, 19th, and 20th century material culture, including framed and three-dimensional works of art and decorative art objects. We're the home of the University Archives, which documents the rich life and history of the University of Virginia from its founding to present day. We document the activities of students, faculty, and administrators, and even we do have some alumni material in the University Archives. We are the largest collection of Virginiana in existence, and we have an exceptional collection of imprints in all formats and printed materials concerning the state and its people. We are very strong and known for our book history, printing, and published materials. We have an extremely broad and rich collection documenting Western manuscripts, paleography, printing, publishing, book illustration, book arts, book history, and bibliography. All of this is developed to support instruction and to facilitate wide-ranging interdisciplinary scholarship and intensive research in these areas. And into this collecting strength comes the Guanhailu collection. Next slide, please. This collection was meticulously assembled by Professor Soren Edgren, who is an expert in rare Chinese books. The collection is regarded to be the most significant of its kind in North America, and we're very proud to have it come to UVA. We have over 500 items in the collection, including rare books, scrolls, ink rubbings, wood blocks, and calligraphic materials. In addition to the Chinese rare materials, the collection also features Korean and Japanese. We are eager to see these being useful in UVA classes and exhibitions, and to have our visiting researchers use them for their scholarly advancement. We're very much interested in the culture of the book at UVA. It's a very active collecting area for us, and with deep ties to the English department and the Rare Book School, which is located on campus. With Professor Edgren's collection, we can now offer instruction and research opportunities in the culture of writing, printing, and bookmaking from China, Korea, and Japan. Next slide, please. Professor Jack Chin says this is a world-class collection, and it makes teaching book and print history of China possible. He cited an interest in Confucian classics, Buddhist and religious texts, and historiography and literary collections when we asked him about the collection and whether he would be interested in it coming to UVA. China invented paper and experimented with methods for reproducing texts, including movable type, centuries before Johann Gutenberg invented his printing press in Germany in the 15th century. Though China invented movable type printing, it didn't develop the technology further. Korea was the first country to cast metal types for the purpose of printing, and the collection contains samples from all major Korean fonts. The Guanhailu collection spans from the 9th century to the 19th. Here you see Professor Edgren, who developed his interest in China and East Asia as a graduate student in Sweden. He spent 3 years in Japan studying East Asian rare books after he graduated from the University of Stockholm. He began his collecting while studying in Japan. Here he is teaching a rare book school class on the history of the Chinese book, and he shows the students a classic called the Book of Documents. It was printed in the later 14th century, and this may be the only copy still in existence. Next slide, please. Professor Edgren has taught this class for a number of years and plans to continue. Rare Book School was one of the factors in his choosing UVA for his collection, in addition to the infrastructure that the small Special Collections Library has for making his collection accessible to researchers from all over the world. Next slide, please. One of the wonderful experiences we can provide and are committed to providing is to have students engage with these texts up close and personal. Next slide. In addition to the rare books, the Guanhailu collection also contains research material that Professor Edgren accumulated, and here's an example of a few pieces from the research collection. Next slide. In addition to Rare Book School courses around the East Asian book tradition, in the Special Collections Library, we consider one of our primary purposes is to support the teaching and research mission of the University of Virginia. We invest time and energy into developing collections that our faculty can use for instruction, and that our librarians and archivists can use when we partner with faculty to support their courses. We value and encourage having undergraduate and in the archives as much as we do graduate students. When we were considering acquiring this collection, we polled a group of faculty and received some enthusiastic responses, such as this additional one from Professor Chen. Next slide, please. And Associate Professor of Chinese Religions, Natasha Heller, was enthusiastic about the prospects. She teaches a course on Chinese religions, and she certainly sees an opportunity to have her students do research projects from the collection. Next slide. Now, I'd like to show you a few examples of the rare materials from the collection. This is a scroll, and it's of the Lotus Sutra, a late 12th century Japanese manuscript, and that's written in gold and silver ink on indigo dyed paper. The frontispiece features religious and secular figures. Likely, the paper was made from hemp and paper mulberry plant fibers. There are 22 sheets of the paper, and the scroll is 1,042 centimeters in length. Next slide, please. The scroll still has its original braided tie and gilt brass engraved roller knobs, which is shown here. Again, this is late 12th century. Next slide. For another scroll, a much smaller scroll this time. It's only about 10 centimeters high, and it's a miniature copperplate edition produced in Japan circa 1880s. Next slide. And it contains the entire text of the Lotus Sutra, which is more than 80,000 characters. The Kyoto printmaker Inui Tatsu engraved the text. Next slide. This text dates back to 1349, and it's a combination of critical commentaries, the originals of which are thought to be lost to time. Interestingly, you can see in the bottom right corner some red seals. These indicate previous ownerships. Next slide, please. Same document. Here's just a closer look at the repairs to the book. I mean, you can imagine something that goes back to 1349. It's been through several hands. There's a lot of stories that the materiality of the item can tell. You can see the conservation efforts here on the left and at the bottom of the page, where there's some really nice treatments that stabilize the text. Next slide, please. Another look at this book, and it's incredible. The text runs from edge to gutter on both sides. It's a marvelous document. Next slide. This is an 18th century manuscript. The image on the left is the outer casing of it, and on the right is the inside. This is the Orchid Pavilion text. And again, those two on the bottom left side, those are seals of previous owners. So it's good to be able to ascertain provenance of these rare materials. Next slide, please. I love this one. The accordion pleats are wonderful. This is a 1909 manuscript of the 1,000-character classic, and it's written in standard script by Kyoto-based calligrapher Yamada Tokuda. The book has been sometimes used to teach written characters to children. Next page. Next slide, I mean. This is a multicolored illustration from a 1748 Japanese edition of Mustard Seed Garden Painting Manual. The bird is so wonderfully delicate. Next slide. This too is from the Japanese edition of the Mustard Seed Gardening Painting Manual of 1748. Next slide. This is a Korean book on philosophy, and it was printed with bronze movable type in 1484, and is thought to be among the books and printing equipment brought back to Japan from Korea in 1593. This is one of two known copies. The other is in the Korea University Library. The history of its ownership can be traced for 4 centuries through the 12 red seals you see on the document. Next slide, please. This is a rare first edition of a famous cookery book. It's been translated into French and English, and you can see seals of previous owners and the evidence of repairs to the damaged pages. Next slide. This is an ink rubbing on an album. It's a single volume that contains part of the classic Book of Changes. This is a rubbing from a stone that was engraved between 833 and 837. This shows that by the 9th century, this kind of text was being engraved on separate registers on large stones to facilitate the bindings of rubbings into scrolls or album formats. This is closely related to the history of printing by woodblock and the development of the book in China. Next slide, please. We're very proud, as I said before, to have this collection in our archive, and we look forward to working with students, faculty, and scholars on new knowledge and scholarship that can be generated from access to this collection. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nawang Thokmey. I'm a librarian for Tibetan, Buddhist, and Contemplative study, and also in charge of the University of Virginia Library Tibetan Collection. Next slide, please. I will talk about the University of Virginia Library Tibetan Collection. The University of Virginia started collecting and receiving Tibetan books in 60s. And in 70s, UVA started the Tibetan study program. Since then, the collection became very unique because the Tibetan and Buddhist study students, faculty, scholars, and local scholars have utilized the collection. And from time to time, we have received interlibrary loan from within the United States and internationally. Next slide, please. Here I'm going to show a few pictures about the collection. That one is myself with the pecha, the loose leaf. And the yellow one is Lhasa Kanju. Next slide, please. And this is same myself, and other one is the regular book format. Next slide, please. This is little description about the collection. Next slide, please. This is a pecha, loose leaf. Next slide, please. In Asian reading room, we have several Tibetan reference materials like dictionary, encyclopedia, and catalogs, etc. Next slide, please. The UVA Tibetan Collection has a handful of rare manuscripts, home in special collection. Here I'm focused on one particular book, which is kind of interesting, the Tibetan Book of Death, which is written in gold and silver. Next slide, please. So this is description about that book. The title in Tibetan is Bardo Turtle, and in English, the Tibetan Book of Death. And then there is a few descriptions about the book and written in gold and silver. So after this, I will show you a few pictures about this book. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we can see written in silver ink and gold ink. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. These are handwritten. These are most of them were written in gold and silver. Next slide, please. And all the Tibetan materials are accessible in Virgo, the University of Virginia online cataloging system. If you use this link, you can able to pull out our materials, search by title, authored, and ISBN number or subject. Next slide, please. The UVA Library Tibetan Collection has not only hold the print materials and also holding electronics. As many of you might know already, Buddhist Digital Resources Center, they produce every year one hard drive. And for the last, each hard drive contained many titles, like 500 to 1,000 titles. And for the last 18 years, they produced 18 hard drives. And each hard drive costs $8,000. And we purchased all of them. So in that sense, we have the UVA Library Tibetan Collection has print materials and also electronic holdings. Next slide, please. And that UVA Tibetan Collection is in different scripts. The first one is in Q cursive or quick writing style. And the second one is Doksa. Third one is Uchen with a hat. And the fourth one is Ume, hatless. Next slide, please. And also, our collections is in different shapes, size, and formats. The first one is pecha, loose leaf, and then Marco fish, Marco film, digital, oversized book, the blue one, and the red one is regular book. Next slide, please. Last year and this year, one of my focus was on building the Tibetan language collection materials. So this is one example which we had purchased last year. Next slide, please. The visitors, the international visitor to the UVA Tibetan Library collection, I will just highlight one or two nations like Canada, South Korea, China, and India. Visitors within the United States and local scholars, and I will just highlight a few of them: Georgia, California, New York, University of Wisconsin, Davidson College, and University of Denver. Next slide, please. And these are the few pictures about the visitors. Next slide, please. So the first one is in the collection, and second one is in my office. Next slide, please. So at present, our main library is under renovation. So the Tibetan collection is located at Ivy Stack in compact shelves. So like this. So I have few pictures. I will show you those. Next slide, please. So this is where the Tibetan books are in Ivy Stack in compact shelf. Next one, please. This is same Tibetan books in the Ivy Stack in compact shell. Next slide, please. And then in fall 2023, the main library renovation will be done. Then our Tibetan collection will be moving back to the main library at the first floor. And these are some of the simple furnitures which we are going to use in a collection. Next slide, please. And this is kind of a diagram. It says first floor stacks looking at the Tibetan collection. Those blacks are going to be the glass wall. And in there, on the right side, we can see 2 study tables and 8 chairs. And the blue and pink are the stacks. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's all I have about the Tibetan Library collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawang. Hello, everyone. I'm Veronica Fu, the East Asian Collections Librarian at UVA Library. Over the last 5 years, I devoted much time to the Weinstein Collection project. So today I'm really excited to share with you some information about the significant collection of scholarly books on Buddhism and Asian art. Next slide, please. I want to start by giving you a brief outline of my presentation so that you know what to expect in the next 10 minutes. I'll first talk a little bit about the history of how the Weinstein Collection found its home at UVA Library, and then together we'll get a glimpse of the collection through some photos. I'll also touch on the scope of the collection and describe our team efforts to make the resources available. Next slide, please. Here is the timeline showing the process of bringing the collection to UVA Library and relevant events and projects afterwards. Professor Stanley Weinstein was one of the first Buddhist studies scholars in the nation, and his wife, Lucy Weinstein, was a scholar in East Asian art. In 2000, when Professor Weinstein retired from Yale University, the Weinsteins announced their plans to bequeath the collection. The former UVA Religious Studies faculty and the former university librarian were instrumental in bringing the collection to UVA. And in 2001, Mr. James McConnell established a library endowment in support of East Asian studies. And in the following year, a celebration was held in the library to celebrate the bequest with the Weinsteins. The Lam Sam room that will house the Weinstein Collection was renovated with funds from Austin and Penn and the Office of the President in the year of 2010. In 2017, the University Library realized the bequest, and the processing of this collection went in full swing in October 2018. And then in 2019, the library held the dedication of Stanley and Lucy Weinstein Buddhist and Asian Studies Library. So far, 95% of the collection have been cataloged, and they are available for checkout. Next slide, please. Now let's look at some photos of the Weinstein Collection. This title was published in 1917. The original one was published around 1838. So basically, this is a facsimile of the original woodcut print. As you may know, ukiyo-e woodcut print began in Japan in the end of the 17th century and flourished through the 19th century. Next slide, please. This is a complete multi-volume set of Japanese paintings, which was published in 1981. But the origin of the painting could be traced back to the time between the 12th century to the 16th century. Next slide, please. Here are some more images of ukiyo-e on the left side. And on the right side is the image of Buddha. And this work depicts the form of peacock Mull. And the origin of it can be traced back to the period between the 12th to the 14th century. Next slide, please. This one is a complete set of translation works of Chinese classic titles. These are mainly ancient Chinese collection of philosophical writings, and some of them are usually associated with Confucian tradition. Next one, please. Here are some music records and some Japanese postage stamps through which we can get a sense of Japanese art. And still, you can see ukiyo-e images here. Next slide, please. On the left side of the slide is only a small portion of the reference works in Weinstein Collection, and there are many dictionaries around different subjects. And on the right side are 2 scrolls of free-looking animals and people, as well as 1 scroll of landscape painting. Next slide, please. Now let's take a closer look at the collection. The Weinstein Collection consists of 10,000 volumes, focusing on Buddhism and Asian art in the field of Japanese studies in the language of Japanese, and resources on Japanese history, language, and literature are also well represented in the collection. As to the English language materials, most of them were published in the 20th century. And this pie chart here represents the proportions of different language materials within the collection. Of the materials involved, about 70% are in Japanese, 20% in English. We also have Chinese, Korean, and German language materials in the collection. Next slide, please. Here are some title highlights of the collection. The first 5 titles are housed in our special collections, and the English ones here serve as a glimpse of the breadth of the subject areas that the collection covers. As you can see here, religion, culture, language, and politics. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to briefly talk about different stages of the project, starting from the arrangement, packing, and shipping to unpacking and consultation for preservation. Librarians from different teams came together, as is shown on slide. And it's worth mentioning that library staff across all units offered help with unpacking. Next slide, please. Here is the workflow for the project. We recruited some students with Japanese or Chinese language skills, give them some training so that they could help with the processing stage. And we were also lucky to have some volunteers working on the project. When the processing was done, library staff started to catalog the books and do the shelf prep. Next slide, please. What you see here is the book plate for the Weinstein Collection. On the right side is a book with the plate. So if you happen to check out a book from UVA Library and see this book plate, you know the book is from the Weinstein Collection. Next slide, please. Now I would like to show you where the collection is stored. As Nawang mentioned, our library is under renovation, and the Weinstein Collection is also stored at Ivy Stacks. And the storage photo is a snapshot of the facility. And on the right, you see book carts loaded with book trees, and we use different labels to mark the book status while working on them. Next slide, please. So this is the future location of the Weinstein Collection. After the renovation is completed, the collection will be housed here, browsable and accessible. And the photo on the right shows attendees examine materials on display during the dedication of the Weinstein Collection back in 2019. Next slide, please. Here's another photo, and that's the pasta location. It only captures a small portion of Professor Weinstein's basement. And on the right is the rough breakdown of the relative size of each location based on a title list from 2006. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the life journey of Stanley and Lucy Weinstein, and I believe the Weinstein Collection, besides being valuable scholarly resources, holds much more meaning pertaining to the couple's life and provides metaphorical enlightenment for us. Well, this is my section. Thank you for your attention. Now I will pass it over to our East Asian Studies librarian, Wei Wang.
Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. First, I'm going to show you a hidden gem in our collection, the Chinese paintings. And then I will talk about our East Asian's founding collection, the Marking Collection. On the screen, you see the boxes of scroll paintings. They are some of the masterpieces of Chinese paintings. That's part of our Chinese collection. The library bodies paintings to support teaching and learning. Professor Dorothy Wang of Art History used the paintings for her Asian Art History course. Next slide, please. Of course, the paintings are not the originals, but high quality reproductions. The originals are in Gugong, the Palace Museum in Taipei. Back in the 1980s, the Palace Museum partnered with the Japanese publisher Nijensa to produce these accurate, true-to-size replicas. My colleague Jeff Hill, who took these photos, had me standing there to show you how big the painting is. Next slide, please. The reproductions accurately recreated the original works, including the shades of ink, texture, and consistency of the original silk and paper. In Chinese, we call it 仿真, which literally translates to imitate real. Nowadays, the Chinese masterpiece paintings have digital images available online. Viewing online is convenient, but it can never replace the experience of viewing actual physical pieces. The reproductions we have at the library allow the UVA students to have an up-close examination. In fact, the high-quality reproductions are probably the best way to see masterpieces. The originals are too fragile to be displayed. Even if you go to Google in Taipei, you may not see the originals. They are usually kept in storage for preservation purposes. Next slide, please. All these paintings are cataloged in Virgo. Virgo is our library's online catalog. Next slide, please. Here is the photo of the old Asian room, now called the Weinstein Library. I'm talking about the short, but there is a long official name, but it's the Weinstein Library, and the Weinstein books will be there. You can see some of the paintings were there. Next slide, please. The paintings there were not just for decorations. The Asian reading room was also used as classroom. Professor Wang would bring her class to the Asian reading room to view the paintings, not just the paintings on the walls. All the other paintings in our collection would be brought out and laid on the tables for the students to examine. Next slide, please. This is the room in between the Asian reading room and the McGregor room. This room is called Lamson room now. During the renovation, there are new windows discovered in this room. So the paintings you see on the wall might not go back there if there is too much sunlight. We don't want them to be damaged by sunlight. They are not ordinary reproductions. Very few libraries have them in their collections. Next slide, please. My colleagues, Brenda and Veronica, have introduced the newest edition of our East Asian collections to you. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Marking Collection. Yes, the Marking Collection marks the first major acquisition of Chinese books by UVA Library. Professor Marking of Hong Kong University was a scholar of Chinese classics. His personal book collection was built up over the course of more than 30 years during his career. After his retirement, he sold a portion of the collection to the University of Malaya in Singapore. The remaining collection, around 10,000 volumes, was acquired by the University of Virginia Library in 1960s. The collection covers traditional 4 categories of Chinese scholarship, 经史子集. The acquisition of Marking Collection, as well as recent edition of the Guanhailou Collection and the Weinstein Collection, were all made possible by our generous donors. The Marking Collection was a gift from the Whedon family. The official acceptance of the Marking Collection was celebrated with 2 bottles of champagne and the books were housed in Chinese room in Alderman, according to our library archive. The Marking collection includes at least 200 titles of Chinese rare books. They have been cataloged in Virgo. Chinese rare books are defined as books that were published before the year 1912, although many of these titles have been digitized. Now you can read them online. Physical copies of these rare books are still considered to be of significant value, particularly for research purposes. The physical attributes of the book, including the printing, the binding, provide insight into the time period and the culture in which those books were produced. The Marking collection also has a few unique items. We added to the historical significance of the collection. Now, I'm going to show you one of the unique items in the Marking collection. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry. Could you move back one? Yes, thank you. In America, there is this famous Chinese dish, General Chow's chicken. The dish was an American invention, but the name General Chow is a reference to the real historical figure from the Qing dynasty, Zuo Zongtang. Chow is probably Cantonese pronunciation. Here on the screen is Zuo Wenxiang 手写杂稿, handwritten notes by Zuo Wenxiang. Zuo Wenxiang was his posthumous name. Awarding posthumous name is a customary practice in China to honor notable individuals after their death. Zuo Wenxiang was multi-talented. Before he started his career in the Qing dynasty's military, he studied agriculture and then wrote a book on the subject too, titled 朴纯格农书. Unfortunately, the book was lost. No copy survived. Here, what we have is not the manuscript of the book, but the sum of the notes he took while studying agriculture. The picture on the left is his handwriting. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, you can find the Marking collection in Virgo. Here it is, the 左文香手写杂稿. Next time you come to UVA, if you like to see the General Chow's notes or the paintings, you can request them from Virgo. Next slide, please. And if you need help to find them in Virgo, I'd be happy to help you. That's all from me. Thank you.
Now I think we've had some questions submitted, so we'll start with this one. Can you speak about the role that Skip Martin played in developing any of these collections? Who amongst my colleagues would like to take that?
Yes, no doubt about Mr. Skip Martin played an important role in Tibetan Collection, as he was a UVA South Asian bibliographer. He had been mining to this collection since the 60s. Through Mr. Martin and also due to the foresight of the Jane Smith, he was a consultant and later became a field director of Library of Congress in New Delhi. The University of Virginia became a recipient of the PLA 40 program. As I heard, in 70s, Richard Skip Martin was taking a Tibetan language course. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawang. We have another question for the panel, and it is, can you touch on the importance of PL 480 in building the Tibetan collection? My work study job in 1973-74 was in the Area Collections Department of Alderman. I worked with Richard Skip Martin and Martin Davis, who had key roles in building the collection during that period.
Yes, I should say this also, no doubt about PLL 40 helps immensely for collecting Tibetan collection and preserve this rich culture, because our PL 840 program allow U.S. Research Institute to acquire Tibetan library material as a mean for India to reduce debt owed to the U.S. government. When we talk about the importance of PL 840 in building the Tibetan collection, then Mr. Jane Smith was a key role player for this project. And there were articles about him by Lawrence called, "This was where Smith's role and the US government money become crucial." Smith identified texts in his tables, and the PL40 monies were used to have copies made using photo offsets and other methods. Even when the Library of Congress transferred Mr. Smith to Indonesia and later Egypt, he remained involved in the Tibetan project, lending his knowledge and contacts to the PL40 programs. Therefore, I should say this, without PL480 and Jane Smith, then Tibetan collection in different universities in the US will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawang, and thanks for that question. I think this is going to be for Veronica and Wei. And the question is, what is the difference between an East Asian collections librarian and a librarian for East Asian studies?
Why don't you start, Veronica, talking about your role, then I'll talk about mine.
Sure. So my title is East Asian Collections Librarian. Basically, you can consider this role as a behind-the-scene figure. And basically, I handle Chinese approvals, and when books come in, I receive them in the system and making sure that all the metadata is accurate. Also, for the collection development, it's definitely within this position. And I also handle some collection projects like the one that I just talk about. Other responsibilities may include grant applications, but basically that's all about the behind scene. I would say it that way. Wei, go ahead, please.
So the librarian for East Asian Studies is, public service. See, Nawang and I are on the same team. We call the Arts and the Humanities within the research and the learning services. So we directly work with the faculty and the students, help them do the research, help them finding the resources. Other than that, we assist the collection teams to identify the need in acquiring new resources. So basically, like Veronica said, she's behind the scene, and I'm out in the public and working directly with our faculty and the students to support the teaching, learning, and the research. That's it.
Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone else have anything? Thank you, Veronica and Wei. I have another question. It's a multi-part question. Are these collections open to the community and or to alumni? When did the library set up the collections, and are they still growing?
Yes.
I can jump.
Oh yeah,
go ahead.
Yes, first you.
Yeah, let me just say that we do have, in special collections, we do have part of the Weinstein Collection and of course, the Guan Hailu, and those may be growing. Depends on what offers we might get, but I imagine the more growing would come in the circulating collections.
Yes, regarding the Tibetan collection, it's open for community and alumni, and also it's growing every year. Every year we add 50 to 100 different titles. That's all. Thank you.
And for East Asian collections, it's definitely growing. That's one thing. And then when it comes to Weinstein Collection, as I mentioned, basically the rough number is 10,000 volumes, and more than 95% of the collection have been cataloged, which means that they are accessible. But just to note that some of the books need to go to preservation. So for that smaller portion, they're still under processing, I would say, or under preservation. And as Brenda mentioned, some of them are in special collections. Other than that, I would say that they are in the circulation sphere, so ready for checkout. And that's it.
I just add one more thing. I did offer to help you find them in Virgo, but I think for the items in special collection, it's best like you would give us a heads up, like because they are some of the items are stored at the IV stack, so it takes a couple of business days to retrieve them to deliver to the special collections reading room. So if you really like to see, you can contact me in advance. I'll be happy to help you.
Wonderful. We have one last question, and it is a request to explain what the PL 480 program is. Was it a USAID program where foodstuffs were to countries such as India, and in return, the counterpart funds were repaid by services provided, such as copies of manuscripts not otherwise available? Anyone want to take a, yes, go ahead, Nawang.
Yes, that is right. PL40, I just explained before. It's a food program which U.S. government lent to the Indian government, and then instead of that, to get the materials like books and others. So that's about the PL40, which I mentioned before, the importance of PL40 for the Tibetan collection and others. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawang. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, and we've come to the end of our program. And on behalf of my colleagues on the panel, Veronica, Wei, and Wang, I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. Thank you. Good night for making this. Thank you for making this a wonderful hour.